Welcome to DFW Running Talk. I'm Chris Detzel, so let's get started. All right, welcome to another DFW Running Talk. I'm Chris Detzel, and today we have special guest Tony Reed. Tony, how are you?
Fine, and you?
Doing well. So,
Great.
you've had quite the background in running and had a great running career. I can't wait to dive in, and I'm sure you're still killing it. I love it.
I'm still killing it, but I'm killing it slower than I was when I was young.
Yeah, that's what happens when we get older, isn't it?
Yes.
One of the things that was very impressive, I was reading your background, and it says you became the first Black person in the world to complete marathons in all 7 continents. That includes Antarctica. So Antarctica has got to have been a really tough marathon, no?
It was extremely tough.
Antarctica.
And what made it even more interesting with us was I was using Marathon Tours and Travel. And
Yeah.
back then, they were the only ones who had a marathon in Antarctica, and they were only holding it every 2 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And I remember one year, the weather was so bad, they were not able to run the marathon on the continent. Instead, they ended up running something like 300 laps on the bottom part of the ship and 400 laps on the top part of the ship in order to get a marathon down in Antarctica.
Sounds terrible.
It's a challenge just getting there because we sailed through the Drake Passage.
Yeah.
And the ship could only hold about 125 people, so it's not like a Princess Cruise line. So you are literally feeling every wave that was hitting the ship.
Oh my God. So you actually were running laps on the ship. Is that what you're saying?
Luckily for us, we had decent weather.
Oh, okay.
So we were able to sail to Antarctica and get off the ship to actually run the marathon.
Wow. Well, let's dive into that more later because that's super impressive. And you've also run like 130 something marathons. Is that right?
Yes, 132 marathons. Ran my first one in 1982 at the Cowtown Marathon.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And
That's been going on.
my first running goal was to run 50 marathons in one state. And that was
50
Texas.
marathons.
So,
okay.
So for about 25 years, the only marathons I ran were in Texas. I had run 21 White Rock marathons, 20 Cowtowns, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, as well as the Dallas Trails Marathon.
Dallas Trails. I've not heard of that one.
Yes, that one, I ran that one from 1993 to 2004. I think it stopped around 2006.
Okay, got it.
And I also ran the 2 of the North Texas State University marathons. People didn't realize they used to have that one.
No.
That one was run back in the early 1980s. And the Walk of Fame Marathon, which was held in Lubbock, Texas, as well as the Daybreak Marathon, which was held in Wills Point, Texas, which is just east of Dallas.
How do you remember all this, man? I've run a lot of half marathons, and I can't even tell you all the ones I've done. So that's pretty impressive. Tell us a little bit about your journey, just how you got into running, because from my understanding, you ran from high school on up.
So when I was about 8 years old, I was at summer camp in St. Louis, where I'm originally from, and they found out that I was pre-diabetic while I was there at camp. And they said that I would probably go on insulin by the time I was a teenager. But I went to a high school where it was mandatory that you participate in sports 2 out of the 3 seasons. And that 3rd season, you had to take PE. So that's when I got into running track and cross country. And I didn't have to go on insulin in high school, but we didn't quite understand the reason why.
Yeah.
In college, again, it was mandatory that you had to take PE. And I read the book Aerobics by Dr. Kenneth Cooper here in Dallas and New Aerobics. And in New Aerobics, there was one paragraph where he stated diabetics who are dependent on insulin could decrease their intake or go completely off of it if they maintain a fitness program.
Okay.
In 1976, while I was in college, I set a lifetime goal of averaging 3 miles a day of what I call running, walking, or crawling.
Love it.
And I've kept a handwritten running journal since 1979. I still keep it to this day.
How many books do you have? Have you gone digital yet or no?
I am now on volume 3.
Okay.
But last year in Berlin, Germany, I logged mile number 50,000.
Wow. Wow.
And I had averaged exactly 3 miles a day since 1979.
Weird. Like you've averaged 3 miles a day since 1979. Well, if I'm doing the math and you're actually running marathons, maybe that counts the days off. So
Right.
Got it. Okay.
So for me, it was all about averaging.
Yeah.
So averaging 3 miles a day. And I realized that it was tough for me to run every day.
Yeah. Well, of
So it
course.
may be running 3, 6, 9, all the way up to 18 miles.
Yeah.
And trying to hit an average also 1,200 miles a year.
Okay. Yep.
So I've always kept those long-term goals, and I never try to go more than 2 days in a row without running.
That's pretty lofty. It's funny because I hit close to 1,200 miles a year-ish. Some are more, some are less. And that's pretty impressive. Today, I eat people running 2,500 miles, and I'm like, not sure you're going to be able to keep that up for a long time. So, because I do think that 1,200 to 13, 14, whatever a year is probably good to run marathons, right? Like you can do pretty good training around that. So I like you proved it 130 something times. So you read this book and it helps you, and you start in college and you start averaging 3 miles a day. And so tell me more.
Yes, when I moved down here to Texas, I originally came down here for graduate school and at TCU.
Yeah.
And I never forget, in February of 1979, there was this big ice storm that hit Fort Worth. And I was walking across university. I was walking from the dorms to the library and saw these idiots out there running down university on this ice. And I kept thinking, these guys have got to be crazy.
Yeah.
Come to find out, that was the very first Cowtown marathon. And it really piqued my interest about, okay, so what is this marathon running stuff?
Yeah.
I made my way over to Dallas in 1980 and was working at Texas Instruments. So Texas Instruments had, back then, they had a running team.
Awesome.
In 1981, I ran on a team where we had a team entered into the Cowtown Marathon. And back then, it was just a Cowtown 10K and marathon.
Okay.
And while I was waiting for the 10K to start, I looked at these guys running the marathon and thought, oh, they look just like me. The building and everything else. Yeah, I'll go ahead and give that a try. So 1982 ended up being my very first Cowtown marathon. And I decided that every year I would run the White Rock Marathon in December and the Cowtown Marathon in February and start my training program for White Rock in July. In fact, on July 2nd was my birthday.
Nice.
And so I realized that training for the White Rock Marathon in December got me through the calorie gaining month of November with Thanksgiving, followed by training for Cowtown in February got me through the calorie gaining months of
What do
December.
you think? So when you looked at Cowtown the first time, did you, and a lot of people don't do it right from a training standpoint, did you know to train and then run them out the several miles? Did you do all that beforehand, or were you not ready for it?
I was ready for it. In fact, again, that was before Al Gore discovered the internet.
Yeah.
So the only way you can really learn how to train for a marathon was through reading books.
Right.
So I read a number of books about it. And later on, I ended up coaching people. And one of the things that they stated back then was you needed to have a base of about 1,000 miles before you even begin the marathon training program.
Well, that's interesting.
And the other interesting thing back then was the prevailing wisdom was if you couldn't run it in under 4 hours, you shouldn't even make it to the starting line. So as a result of that, you really had to train in order to make it to the marathon.
Okay. You took that stuff really intensely. I like that. You really took it serious.
And then when I look at runners today, a lot of them don't have a strong base before they even begin a marathon training program. And you get a very high dropout rate of people actually finishing a marathon who started training for it.
People, I think a lot of people like to set these lofty goals, and marathon is always one of them. And you look at a marathon, it's a long ways. And if you don't train for it, it's even harder. You can really hurt yourself. And so you've done several marathons. I'm sure you've had some really great ones and some bad ones and things like that. And even if you are in really good shape, sometimes you have a bad day, and that bad day feels bad. If you don't train, you're just going to feel bad, period. And maybe a pretty good chance of not completing the marathon. And
I like to say, I've never had a bad marathon, I have had marathons that turn into training runs after 20 miles.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Smart.
yeah, you actually know at some point in time I'm going to throw the towel in.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to look at this as a marathon, but it's just a long marathon
It's a long
that's
training
preparing
run.
me. Yeah, it's a long training run that's actually preparing me for my next marathon.
Yeah. So you did that one marathon and then you're like, okay, I'm going to do 2 a year at least. So the one in White Rock in December and then the one which is now Run Dallas. Is that
Correct?
Yeah. And then the Cowtown, which I've done the half several times. I love that race, by the way. I love both of them, but Cowtown has been always special to me. I don't know why. I think for me, it's always been because the crowd support has always been pretty good and it was always a cool atmosphere, but I've always enjoyed it. So I think that's really cool that you've been running it since 1982.
Yes. And as I like to say, in the early, Cowtown was actually known as one of the toughest marathon courses in Texas. Yes, because around mile 20, you would be running down Hewlin Street. For those who are familiar with Fort Worth, they would know you're running down Hewlin Street and then headed towards downtown. And then you got to the Hewlin Street Bridge, which is very long uphill. And that's when you're crossing over the train tracks in the Trinity River.
Yeah.
That used to be like around mile 18 or 20.
Okay.
And I remember going down Hewlin Street, and I'm watching the people in front of me, and I'm seeing people running down, and then they're making this right turn. And I thought, great, we don't have to go up this hill. Those are the people that were literally quitting the marathon. They looked at the hill and just, that was it.
Now there's races that have just hills. So that's interesting.
So then I believe around 1985, they changed the route so that runners would end up going down that hill. They made it a lot more what I would call runner friendly.
That's interesting. So was that hill just almost unrunnable or what?
It was just after running 18 miles to look up this hill that is about a half mile or 3/4 of a mile long.
Yeah.
It was just mentally taxing and you didn't know what was beyond that hill.
Okay. That makes sense. Those are always a struggle. And I still think Cowtown is, I don't know what it is. I've only ran it, so I've run it like 10 times. And usually I don't have a great race. I still love the race, but I've only had 2 or 3 pretty good races. And the rest are like, it's always been tough to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's some of the hills and it's the rolling hills. And there is a hill at mile 9 or 11, I forget. But that seems to be, gets into my mind a little bit.
Interesting thing back then, instead of giving medals,
oh, they give trophies.
They gave trophies.
Nice. I like it. Look at that.
All of the runners ended up getting a finisher's trophy back in 1982.
So that's not anything new. All finishers get the trophies.
Yeah,
I like
same
that
thing
one.
for White Rock in 1983. Everyone got a finisher's trophy.
Yeah, if you're watching on video, then you can see the trophies that Tony's showing. I like it. So you run, so early in your career, you're running a couple of marathons a year. And then as you start thinking about what was next, was it like, okay, now I want to do these 50 marathons in Texas? Or was it, hey, when did you start thinking about the 7 marathon? When did you start getting outside of Texas?
Okay.
Unless you want to talk something before. Go ahead.
Back then, when I ran my first marathon, I was married.
Okay.
And as I'd like to say, I couldn't justify going out of town just to run a race.
That makes sense.
So my long-term objective, I said, if I could just run Cowtown and White Rock, and as my kids would get older, as they say, when their kids are young, they want your time and not your money. When they get older, they want your money and not your time. As the kids would grow older, they wanted less of my time, and then I would be able to go and travel out of town to races.
Yeah. Okay.
And I had decided when I turned 50, I wanted to run a marathon on my birthday, and I wanted to run a marathon a month, and each one had to be in a different state or country.
So when you turned 50, that was like last year, right?
I wish.
Okay, I was wrong. All right, go ahead.
So there were only two marathons in the world that were on my birthday.
Okay.
That was Leadville, Colorado.
Yep.
And the Gold Coast, Australia. I opted to go to Australia.
Well, that makes sense. Leadville's pretty rough if you've done that marathon before.
Yes. So that year, And by the time I turned 50, I had already run 50 marathons in Texas.
Okay, wow. So you hit it. When did you hit it that year? When you were 50 or 49?
I did that in, let me look at my notes. I did that, I believe, in 2004.
Okay, all right.
2002 or 2004. And I turned 50 in 2005.
Okay, got it.
And in 2004, I had a business trip over in Europe. So I ran I took advantage of that and just ran a marathon, that weekend.
That's great. I love those trips, by the way. That's exactly, I won't run marathons. I don't do halves and things. That's the way to do it. If I went to Belfast one year and they had a half marathon it was a trail half marathon. I thought, I'm going to sign up for that. So I get there on Friday night, and then Saturday morning, they're like 7 or 8 hours of a difference. So I was pretty tired. And I went out and ran it, and I won the half marathon. And then I had some beers with some locals on that Sunday. It was so awesome. And then I went to work on Monday. So I love that.
The European marathon really opened my eyes to what a small marathon could really look like.
Yeah.
So this was a Tailwinds Marathon in Copenhagen. They had a 5-hour cutoff, and you had to qualify by proving that you could run a marathon in under 5 hours.
No problem for you.
And then they held the race registration out of the back of a guy's pickup truck.
Awesome.
We knew going into the race that there were going to be no finisher medals, no T-shirts, no bibs, and no aid stations.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and when we got there, we were lucky that he was able to get someone to donate the race numbers. Someone else donated the cheesiest looking finisher medals you would have ever seen in your life.
So you had something. Yeah.
And they had measured the course, so we knew that it was certified. And there were going to be no one stopping traffic.
Right. A place you've never been.
Yes, to a place that I've never been. And I got lost twice during the marathon.
Yeah.
But I still managed to, of course, cross the finish line and finish. So that was my first international marathon. And like I said, Gold Coast, Australia was my second one.
Okay.
And at that point, someone was saying you can either run marathons in all 50 states or pursue running the 7 continents. And I looked at it and I figured the cost to go to run the marathons in all 50 states, especially to go to places like Idaho, Montana, and all these places, I said, I just soon go ahead and travel overseas. So the next marathon I ended up running was the 2006 Great Wall of Marathon, again, through marathon tours. And on that trip, I met runners from Texas. Some of the main ones I remember was Jill and Jillian, who live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There was Steve, who was a physician here in Dallas, I believe. All of us ended up hanging out in China for about 10 days after we ran the marathon.
Wow.
And so we all said, what's next? And I soon to realize with marathoners, especially adventurous marathoners, the question is always going to be what's next?
That's right.
Okay. Yes, running a marathon in Australia was an eye-opener. I went down there by myself, made all my own travel arrangements, flew into Brisbane, Australia.
Wow.
Had booked my car rental, went out to the rental car, and I did not realize they drove on the other side of the road.
Oh, man. Oh, my goodness. I can't wait to hear this. I bet that was hard.
So this was, again, prior to the internet really being out there. I had my directions printed off on how to drive from the airport in Brisbane to the Gold Coast, but they had been hit by a really bad rainstorm and what have you in Australia that washed out some of the roads.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm having to try to attempt to follow printed directions only to find out I couldn't because the roads had been washed out. And I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. It was an adventure.
It was the right side of the road there. So, anyways, how'd you get through it? What'd you do? You just stopped and asked people or what?
Luckily, the brake and the gas pedal are on the same side of the operating on the same side as they do here in the States.
Okay. That's good.
However, the windshield wiper and the turn signal are on the opposite side. So every time I wanted to turn, I would instinctively end up hitting the windshield wiper and the wipers are going back and forth instead of the turn signal operating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to stop at gas stations and trying to get a map and trying to get directions on how to get to the Gold Coast.
Okay.
But once I got there, everything was just fine once I got there.
Sure.
And the plane trip to get down there was horrible.
Really?
So I thought to myself, I'm never ever going to do 7 continents because the plane flight was something like over 24 hours to get there back then.
Yeah.
And I had a
Still pretty
horrible
far.
flight. Huh?
It's still pretty far.
Yeah, I had a horrible flight. I was literally trying to figure out how I can get back to the U.S. without getting on a plane. That's how bad the flight was getting down there.
Wow.
And the day after the race, I went on a tour of a rainforest, and I had the race application for the Antarctica Marathon in my pocket. So we get off the tour bus, we go up to this little bush, and the tour guide says, "This is the Antarctica bush." And I thought, okay, is this an omen? I have the Antarctica Marathon application in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I'm standing right in front of the Antarctica Marathon bush. So I says, okay, I'll take this as a sign.
Just do it.
And as soon as I got back to the U.S., I mailed in the application for the Antarctica Marathon, which was in 2007.
Let's back up. So you run the Australia Marathon. How was that?
That was great. I had a great time. One of the things I realized when I got to Australia is just as, and I don't think Americans may be conscious of this, but when we're walking down the street, we tend to walk on the same side of the street that we drive on.
Yeah. Yep.
Australians were doing the same thing, so I was constantly bumping into people until I realized I needed to walk on the other side of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And same thing with running. So it was interesting just getting mentally adjusted
Yeah.
to that. But like I said, my birthday's July 2nd, which is winter time down there. So the weather was perfect.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then you get information about this Antarctica, you mail it in, and they accept you, obviously. And then you go to, when was that one? It was like,
The Antarctica Marathon was in February, which is summertime down there.
Which, yeah, you need summer there.
Yes. And it was interesting being down there because since we sailed down there, we had kind of classes or little workshops about life in Antarctica and about ecology. And they said that you could see the impact of global warming down in Antarctica before the rest of the world could see it. Oh. And I found it real interesting because since then, I've looked at photos of people running marathons in Antarctica, and you didn't see a lot of snow.
Yeah.
So it was really, I like to say, more of an ecological trip, and where we just happened to take one day to run a marathon. But the rest of it was sailing in and out and around Antarctica and learning about.
How fun is that? I'm sure you learned a ton.
Yes, one of the interesting things was that Antarctica is the only continent where there are no countries. And anytime you were in one of the research stations there in Antarctica, you were technically governed by the laws and rules of those countries. For the Antarctica Marathon, we ran through the research bases for Chile, Russia, China, and Uruguay.
Oh,
and
that
we
makes
got our passports stamped by all of those countries.
That's cool.
So technically, in one marathon, I ran through China, Chile. So it was cool.
That is cool. Yeah. I love that. And then how was that marathon? Was it cold? You said the weather was nice?
It was extremely cold.
Oh, okay.
In fact, this captain said, if you didn't want to know the temperature, plug your ears. And I did, because I knew the minute he said minus, whatever came after that, I was just going to stay on the ship. I was not going to get out there to run the marathon.
Yeah, that'd have been me. But you did go to Antarctica for the marathon, so makes sense that you just run it.
Yes, and I kept telling myself that living in St. Louis prepared me to run the Antarctica Marathon.
Really? I know it's chilly there.
Yes, one of the sports I played in high school was soccer. And I was, in fact, a starter on our varsity soccer team. But our soccer season was in the winter time in St. Louis back then.
No.
So we would be playing on top of 12 to 18 inches of packed snow. The soccer field was marked off using crushed charcoal instead of chalk. So we would know what the playing field was like.
Makes sense.
And your incentive behind starting was you got the opportunity to run up and down the field and stay warm instead of freezing on the sidelines.
That makes sense. That would probably incentivize me a little bit. I'm not I like to run in the cold, but not that cold, you know. You do the Antarctica. Now, you said you had a pretty good race. I'm sure it slowed you down in the minuses.
Tremendously. We had to go up a glacier. That was 3/4 of a mile of just a sheet of ice.
So would you
So
have to
you
wear like some kind of different shoes or something?
I wore my regular running shoes, but I had this kind of slip on that had spikes on the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So I was able to literally run up the glacier and then turn around and run back down.
Okay. You didn't slip?
And I still have those. And when we have an ice storm here in Dallas, I will put those on. In fact, put on just about all the clothes I used down in Antarctica. I still have them. And I will run around White Rock Lake wearing those clothes. So it's peaceful. There's no one else out there. And it's nice.
Yeah, you remember in 2013, I think, 14, we had that ice capade here in Dallas. The marathon was shut down in December and all that stuff. Did you go out for a run with those those
Most,
shoes and stuff? Yeah.
most definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're like, finally, I get to use them. So that's pretty cool. And then, so what was next after that? How you get home? And by the way, I have a quick question because I was thinking about this. And one of the things that I think is very noticeable in our running community is that people like to run with others a lot. And there's lots of now communities in different parts of DFW that probably 60 or 70 groups now that you can run in. Did you run in any groups back then or?
Back then, the main running group that I ran with was the Mid-Cities Runners, the Mid-City Runners Club. I don't know if they're still in existence today, but they would have a series of races leading up to the Dallas Marathon.
Yeah,
they had what I call, I think, the Nocturnal 9, the Terrible 10-miler, the Torturous 20-miler. All of those would be leading up to the White Rock Marathon. So I was a member of that running club. I was also a member of the Arlington Road Runners at the time because they had some really good half marathons in the Arlington area. And so these were all before a lot of those areas became developed.
Yeah, got it. That's interesting.
The roads were open.
Yeah, a big running club that I've been part of, and they've been around for a while, but is Dallas Running Club. And they have a training group now that really focuses in on the first one is Dallas. So run Dallas. So get people to the marathon or half marathon or whatever you want really now. And then they have a spring program that will allow you to get to, I don't know if it's Oklahoma that they care about now or Boston. It's in that range. So I'm not sure what the race focus is. There's all kinds of marathons there, but no, that's good. I was just curious if you had.
So and I was actually a member of the Cross Country Club of Dallas.
Yeah.
Which then changed its name to the Dallas Running Club, and I am a member of the Dallas Running Club now.
Okay. Do you run some of the races? They only have 5 or 6 now, but.
No, I don't. Right now, I just enjoy running for the sake of running versus running in races. But I was on the board of directors for the Dallas Marathon for, I think, 7 or 10 years.
Okay.
And right now, I'm on their advisory board.
All right. So you know Logan and everybody else over there.
Yes, Marcus. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yes. In fact, I was actually working the finish line of the marathon. I usually end up working the finish line of the marathon and working in the information booth during the expo.
Okay. That's awesome. A lot of people will need information. I could tell you that. My wife volunteered for packet pickup, and I ran that. I paced the half, so that's how I volunteer is just pace.
Okay.
Pacing, and my wife will pace sometimes, but she also likes to volunteer for packet pickup and stuff like that. We know Marcus really well and some others that it's a very local kind of run, but it's big now, right? That's probably the biggest run in DFW race.
Yes, I actually wish they would name the Ultra after Marcus.
Yeah.
He was the one, I think, who conceived it.
I'm sure he did. Yeah.
I think it would be a great honor because he's been around for a long time.
Yeah. I was like, when are you going to retire? He goes, I don't know, man. I like this job still. So,
yeah.
He's really good at it. All right. Get back from Antarctica. What's next after that? What happened there and what you were thinking and stuff like that?
One of the interesting things about us sailing down to Antarctica, the president of Marathon Tours and Travels talked with the gentleman who was a race director of the Fin del Mundo Marathon, which was in Ushuaia, Argentina.
Yeah.
And the race was normally on Saturday or Sunday. And he convinced the race director to change the date of the race until that Wednesday. So we were able to dock in Ushuaia, Argentina on Tuesday and run the Fin del Mundo Marathon on Wednesday.
That's
so
crazy.
We were able to cover 2 continents in one trip. Now they
Well,
don't do
actually,
that
you covered
anymore.
both continents in one trip,
Or,
technically,
yeah, that's
Antarctica.
right.
That's pretty
So,
cool.
so with that, the only marathon I had left to finish was the only continent was Africa.
Ah,
So the runners that again we initially met up in China, who were from Texas,
Hmm.
they convinced me to go ahead and run the marathon in Kenya with them
wow,
in June. So three of us ended up finishing our seven continents together.
that's pretty
So that
cool.
was Jill, Jillian, and I all finished up in Africa together for our seventh continent.
Wow, I bet that was
And
special.
it was while I was down in Antarctica, the race director told me that there had only been two other blacks to finish a marathon in Antarctica, and
Wow.
none of them at that time had finished the seven continents.
How'd that make you feel?
Made me feel pretty good.
Yeah,
It gave
love
me
it.
added incentive to go ahead and finish a marathon in Antarctica. And Jill and Jillian were talking about, again, running a marathon in Africa. To wrap up the seven continents, I thought, hey,
Might as
I
well.
may as well go ahead and knock it out.
That's
And
pretty cool.
they were already talking about what's going to be after seven continents. And
Of course.
they were trying to convince me to run the Mount Everest marathon.
Uh-huh.
And I decided not to. I opted
Smart.
out of running that one.
Smart, man. You've got to be there to get used to it for 10 days or something. You
Right.
have to spend time there because it is really hard on you. And so you probably made a
Yeah.
good decision.
Yes. And they pointed out that the rocks were falling down the mountain while they were running. So you literally had to dodge
Oh my God.
boulders during
No
that marathon.
thanks. I just want to run a marathon, not
Yeah.
dodge boulders. But I'm sure it's fun. Some people like that.
So, and one of the things I tell people is once you start doing these type of adventuresome things,
Yeah.
you meet adventuresome people along the way.
For sure.
In a banquet in Buenos Aires, it's totally random where you sit. I happened to sit next to this lady named Jenny, and we struck up a conversation. And Jenny wanted to run a marathon on all seven continents. Now, at that time, there were about 250 people in the world who had run marathons on all seven continents. So the odds of meeting someone else who had the same goal was pretty remote.
Well,
And she also said she wanted to climb the highest mountain on all seven continents.
that's
And the only one she had not tackled was Mount Everest. So we ended up spending dinner talking about international races and Mount Everest. Jenny ended up finishing marathons on all seven continents. So in 2008, I was featured in Runner's World for being the first Black to do the seven continents. Jenny was featured in Runner's World for being the first woman in the world to run marathons on all seven continents and climb the highest mountains on all seven continents.
That's pretty cool.
And when I was in Ushuaia, Argentina, again, I was about to board the ship to go to Antarctica, and someone called my name, and it was this lady named Elizabeth from my high school in St. Louis.
Small world.
And so she's there with a friend of hers, and his name is Dave Hahn. And she introduces me to him, and all of us start talking. It turns out Dave Hahn had reached the summit of Mount Everest 13 times.
Wow.
More times than anyone other than the shepherds who worked on Mount Everest, and he had rescued people on Mount Everest.
Wow.
When there was an avalanche on Mount Everest, he happened to be there and ended up rescuing people. And if you know the history of Mount Everest, I think it was in 1924, there was a British expedition that reached the summit of Mount Everest. These two climbers, Irvine and Mallory, died trying to reach the summit, and they didn't know whether or not they ever reached it. Dave Hahn found Mallory's body on the summit of Mount Everest 50 years or so after.
Wow.
Was it 50 or how many years it was after he had died up there?
Wow.
Well,
I'm sure it was preserved from all the being frozen and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a crazy story.
So like I said, I tell people, once you venture outside your comfort zone and you start exploring the world, you meet some truly amazing people along the way.
I think running does that. And maybe it's just any sport that you get hardcore into, but it just brings the community together where no matter where you go. I remember going to Tel Aviv one year for work. I went a couple of times in that year, and I found a running community that would run with me just the few days that I was there. And I will never forget that. It's just people are running everywhere. That's the beauty of it. And then you can find them. They're there.
Yes, and I like to, of course, do quite a bit of reading about the places that I'm going to go before I get there. And when I was running in Berlin, uh, I noticed these little squares, brass squares on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't realize that there was a group, an organization that was identifying the houses that people lived in who died during the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And so these squares, they're probably no bigger than 2 inches that I was noticing while I was on the ground running.
That's
That I
funny that
think
you
people who are on the
saw
tour
that.
buses, they're not exposed to those types of things. So I was running through the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I always take my running shoes with me whenever I travel and slip them on and get tour the city.
Wow. What a great journey. What have you been doing now? What's your focus now? Is it just running with the community and running at the house, or obviously you're
Well,
involved in the Dallas stuff, volunteering and stuff like that?
about in 2020, I was on a road trip with a friend of mine, and she came up with a suggestion that I do a documentary about distance runners, and more specifically about African American women distance runners.
I think I saw that on your website.
I ended up writing and directing a documentary called Breaking 3 Hours, Trailblazing African American Women Marathoners.
Yeah.
And to put it in perspective, the first one broke 3 hours in 1975, and that was Marilyn Bevins, and she broke it in Boston.
Okay. Yeah.
And she ended up becoming one of the top 10 fastest female marathoners in the world in 1977, when she placed second at Boston and second in Chicago.
Pretty impressive.
So between 1975 and 2020, only 19 African American women broke 3 hours in a marathon.
Really?
And I did the numbers. During that time, 14 million people finished marathons in the U.S. Roughly 2%, or only 280,000, finished marathons in under 3 hours. That 19 were African American women born in this country. And of that 19, I knew 9 of them.
That's pretty
So
crazy.
they
No, it's
all,
been broken a lot of times now. Just women hitting 220s and 225s and 217s, stuff like that.
but very few of them were African American women that were born in this country.
Oh, in the U.S. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Wow. That is
So
impressive.
the documentary came out, and last year, Runner's World identified it as one of the most motivational and inspirational running documentaries of all time.
That's pretty cool. I'm going to have to read it.
And last year, I wrote and directed another documentary called We Are Distance Runners, Untold Stories of African American Athletes. That one ended up winning 19 awards and film festivals in the U.S., Canada, Sweden, and India.
Look at you, Tony. That's impressive. Now tell me a
And
story. Tell me one of the stories in it that's really cool that you like a lot,
okay,
if you don't mind.
on that one, we profiled 6 African Americans, and I happened to be included in that documentary.
Okay.
In the 3rd grade, when they found out that I was pre-diabetic, I was in my mother's office at Soldan High School, where she was a principal secretary. The gentleman walked in, and she introduced us, and his name is Ron Gregory. And when he left, she said that was Dick Gregory's younger brother. People in St. Louis know that Dick Gregory and Ron Gregory were great distance runners. And in fact, Dick Gregory set the national high school record in the 1 mile, but they refused to recognize it because it was running an all Negro track meet. Back then, high school sports in the state of Missouri were segregated.
This sucks.
And Dick Gregory led a walkout of the black high schools in St. Louis, which forced the integration of high school sports throughout the state of Missouri.
It's awesome.
So because I was going over to Soldan High School every day after school, I got exposed to cross-country running.
Yeah.
And Ron Gregory was the cross-country coach at
Wow.
Soldan High School. So
That's pretty cool.
He ended up introducing me to cross-country running and distance running,
That's pretty
even while I
cool.
was in 3rd grade.
Love that. And
So
all your
both of
memories, how
them,
do you remember all this stuff? I know you wrote it, but I think that was in 3rd grade, you know?
both of them are in the documentary.
Okay.
Now, there's something called the marathon hat trick,
Mm-hmm.
which consists of running at least 100 marathons on all 7 continents and marathons in all 50 states.
Yeah.
there were only 60 people in the world who had done that as of, it was around 2017.
Okay.
Only looking at 60 people in the world.
And you're one of them, right?
60, I'm one of them. Of those 60, 3 are African American.
Okay.
2 went to the same elementary school in St. Louis.
No, that's crazy.
And that's Lisa Davis. That's Lisa Davis and me. So the odds of all this happening is pretty remote.
Yeah, that is very, but it did. So,
and Lisa's parents went to Soldan High School, which is where Ron Gregory was also a teacher.
He was highly influential.
Yes.
Wow.
And in fact, Ron Gregory ended up setting the national high school records in the mile and 2 mile, and both he and Dick Gregory were NCAA All-Americans in track and cross country.
Wow. What a story. What a great story. I love that. How fun. Thank you for sharing that. So now you wrote some documentaries and books and things like that. But you get a book out too, right?
Yes, I've actually written 6 books. So one of my favorite books is the one that I wrote about my adventures on running marathons on all 7 continents.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was a business executive. My area of expertise was information technology, in fact. And later on, I went to UT Dallas, got a master's in accounting, and passed the CPA exam.
I saw that.
So I ended up writing a book about using the same techniques that I used to run marathons and to coach runners was the same thing that I was using to manage my IT staff. And again, borrowing from distance running, it's all about getting people to move outside of their comfort zones, to become more adventuresome, to become what I would call calculated risk takers.
Yeah.
So there's something called a type T personality, which stands for thrill seekers. And you have mental thrill seekers and you have physical thrill seekers.
Okay.
So your mental thrill seekers, you're looking at entrepreneurs, your entrepreneurs, your project managers, who are all people that take risk.
Yeah.
On the physical side of risk taking, you have your endurance athletes, which include, of course, your marathoners, your triathletes, all of these people who deal with these different activities where you are in these environments where you have no control over the weather.
Yeah.
So you have to develop that mental toughness in order to be successful in those sports.
Yeah.
So
running's one of them.
So I was basically taking the same techniques that I was using to run marathons to manage my technical staff.
Cool. Love it. I love how you blended those two together. I think there's a lot of, as I look at some of the most successful people and those that really run and really focus in on accomplishing certain things within running, or in general, it's a general statement, but are pretty successful in business too, or vice versa, right? Because they just know how to focus and they want to be the best they can.
One of the challenges that they're actually having in corporate America today is people are coming into corporate America, they're afraid to take risks.
Yeah.
In fact, what they will do, rather than to take risk and take responsibilities, we will take our cell phones, we will call our boss, text our boss, and instead of going ahead and making that particular decision or doing all the research and then making the appropriate decision, we just pass the buck up the ladder.
Yeah.
So we're losing a lot of risk takers, so to speak, in corporate America.
Yeah, that could be a lot of things, right? You could have a boss that's a micromanager and say, oh, why did you do that? Those kinds of things. But I'm with you. I think that's true. If I think about like my careers, just thinking about those that don't make decisions, just make it happen. Look, you could just make it happen. Like, why are you asking so many people? Who cares? I agree with you. Yeah, that's a good point.
So one of the things that I told my staff is I said, never come to me with a problem. Yeah. Unless you have at least 3 possible solutions, because my objective is to hire problem solvers, not problem identifiers.
Exactly.
My solution to that particular problem would be to get rid of you.
Exactly. I love that. Very blunt. I like that.
So if I'm busy doing everyone else's work, I won't have time to go running.
You need that time to run. It's don't bother me. I'm on a run. Make a decision and go. Like, we'll deal with it if there's some fallout later.
Now, there was a very interesting flip side to this, though. I encourage my staff to take 2-week vacations, not just take a day here and a day there.
Yeah.
I said that when you take a 1-week vacation, you spend the first 3 days thinking about the work that you left at the office.
Yep.
You enjoy yourself for 1 day, then you spend 3 days thinking about the crap you're going to walk back into when you get into work. And I said, so I want you to take a 2-week vacation so you'll be like me. You'll come back in the office. You'll forget people's name. You'll forget your login ID. You'll forget your password.
Yeah.
That's when you enjoy yourself.
100%.
And I commit to them, we will not call you while you're on vacation. I truly wanted them to just get away and enjoy themselves. And the only way they could do that was for their fellow coworkers to be willing to take risk, to take responsibility, and cover each other. So it went all the way down, such that everyone became a problem solver. Everyone was willing to step up and learn new things, because I wanted them to know everything that I was doing, so I would go on vacation and no one would call me.
We need more leaders like Tony Reed here. I love it. I'm sure your staff loved you.
I was looking out for their well-being and their best interests, and I encouraged them to, like I said, to go outside of their comfort zone. So I'd ask them, tell me something that's on your bucket list, and I would encourage them to pursue it, because I knew it would get them outside of their comfort zone. And they would bring that same energy and that same inquisitiveness, so to speak, back into the office place. So I had a gentleman, for example, who was an amateur race car driver. Another one who got into barrel racing at rodeos, flying big two-handed kites.
Fun is that?
People would say, hey, Tony, I've always wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
So I would encourage them to pursue doing that and block out 30 minutes every day just to sit down and write. So I was encouraging and motivating them to do all these things outside of work.
Yeah.
And bringing that same energy and excitement into the office. Because I told them my objective every day I went to work was to leave as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because there were things that were more exciting and more fun that I wanted to do. There's only so much you can do to make a job look hot and sexy.
That's right. You still got to do work.
Once you reach that point, then let me get you excited about things outside of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And bring that same enthusiasm into the office.
I think if you don't have a life and all you do is work and you don't do anything after work, that's to me, it's just not feasible. Like, I don't want to just go to work all day, every day. Look, I like parts of my work and things, but get a hobby. I remember there's this guy, he used to be one of my clients at work, and he was such a great leader that he did, what are those, the biking, running, and swimming triathlons, but the full and everything. And he was really good at it. And he'd go to that main one every year. But his staff started doing some running and some biking, but then started following his guidance and those things. And it was like, wow, this guy is a huge influence on his team in activity. They thought a lot like he did. He was a senior leader, and he had other senior leaders below him and things like that. And so they were just as focused as he was, not just at work, but outside of work. And it sounds like that you're like that as well. So,
yeah, there's something called a transformative leadership style.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the gentleman was doing, and that's exactly, turns out, what I was doing. It's like you not only talk the talk, but you walk the walk. Your staff sees where you're achieving different things, where you're expanding your comfort zone. You're not afraid to learn new technology or new processes. You're very much open-minded and very much solutions-oriented versus problem-oriented. Give you an example. We had one technical project where they guesstimated would cost us between $10 to $12 million. I asked for a budget of $4 million, and we did it for $2.6 million. And it came in ahead of schedule.
That's awesome. See?
And so I just had one story after the other where my staff members were just excelling in their work, and I wasn't micromanaging, and some of the other managers couldn't understand what was going on.
What's your leadership style? If you're highly respected and you get a team that's highly productive and inside and outside of work, I think that, and you have a leader that is the same, I think that speaks volumes, and people will follow that and respect that. I know plenty of leaders that are just like that, and I love that. There's just one guy I would love to go anywhere he goes. Just let me know. Seriously, there's leaders that bring their own leaders to other companies. You see it in CEOs and things like that. So as you think, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that I like to tell managers is a friend of mine was out running. He was, in fact, actually training for the Dallas Marathon. It was his last run before the marathon. So you're looking at two to 3 days before the race. And he saw this leaf laying on the ground. And he decided that was going to be his imaginary finish line. He was going to slam his foot down on the leaf and say, "That's it, ready for the race." He slammed his foot down on the leaf and twisted his ankle, and that he didn't realize that there was a nut underneath the leaf.
Yeah.
And I tell people, just because you see a leaf and you think it's fragile, be very careful. It may be a nut. So when you're looking at that employee that you think is fragile, and as a manager, you're going to use your ego and your power, and you're going to slam that employee, that person may be a nut. So you treat every person with respect.
Yeah. Tony, this has been really great. What a great career, from a running career, and then lots of great stories and written books. And I did have some idea, but didn't know all these awesome stories. So I appreciate you coming on and telling them. I'm positive that people are going to love this, and appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome. And one of the things that I tell people when they look at my accomplishments is I didn't do it all in 1 year. That's number one. Yeah. And resting is just as important as running.
Yeah.
So take those days off and enjoy them.
Very good. Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I think resting is important, but stay consistent in your running. Keep doing it. That's how you're going to get better. And that's how you're going to accomplish 132 marathons in 7 countries and be the first at different things like you. That's pretty amazing. Thanks, Tony, for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another DFW Running Talk. I'm Chris Detzel. Rate and review us. Don't forget. Until next time, talk to you soon. Thanks, Tony.
Okay.